Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts' Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 24th of November 2023. Sorry this is a little bit late, I had to go and pick one of my boys up from school. He is opening one of these pop-up ice skating rinks that's opening in the city next to mine for this winter period, and he's an ice skater and he's going to do a routine, 13-year-old. He's going to do a routine and he's going to be dressed up as the Grinch as well. So he's quite excited about that. More excited about just bunking off school for half a day, but there you go. So anyway, that's just a little window into my life that you didn't need, but I gave it to you anyway. So yeah, right. Let's go to the military aid, which is there's quite a bit to talk about from a few different points of view. But first of all, let's return to this idea from Germany. This idea of another air defense system, the idea that they need air defense capabilities is their number one priority. I talked about that in the last video. I talked about that yesterday. This is what Zelensky has very publicly announced, but I think he announced 5 different reasons why they need air defense systems, and I think there's a 6th, which is to help with the front line. I think that has to be a component of their desire for these air defense systems. Only Germany will deploy an additional Patriot system, air defense system in Ukraine in winter, and I'm wondering whether that's the one they pulled back from. I think they pulled back one of their own from Poland. I think Germany had a German Patriot system on the border of Poland. They probably thought that there's less risk now of Russia doing something bonkers like that. So they might have pulled that one back and are using that to give to Ukraine. That's fantastic. Really good, because obviously best system in the world arguably, and the Ukrainians will eventually have something like, well, once all the 5 from Raytheon are delivered, they've got the 2 already. This is a 3rd one, and I think they've got bits and pieces, launchers and different elements from places like the Netherlands. So they'll have over 8 batteries. And they can link them all together with the system they have, which links all of their air defense systems together into like a centralized point where they can decide what air defense capability takes out whatever the threat is. And yeah, it's coming together. They're in a much better position now than they were last year, which is why lots of people are down on where Ukraine are and the fact that this is a war that's dragging on. It's 2 years now. But one of the best silver linings to that cloud is that they are just in an immensely better position now in terms of materiel, in terms of capabilities than they were a year ago. Right, at the Ramstein meeting, the United States removed any speculation regarding the alleged choice between Ukraine and Israel, the Ministry of Defense said. So, quote, during yesterday's online negotiations, so it's the day before, a very clear statement was made twice that there can be no talk of any choice. The United States stands next to Israel, but at the same time is fully committed to all its obligations to support Ukraine, said the head of the press and information from the Ministry of Defense, Ilarion Pavlyuk. I think Ukraine is a far more pressing situation than Israel. I think Israel could go south and it could go all a bit wrong given all of the international players around there, but Israel's in a position to stand up for itself, particularly against like Hamas, and irrespective of all the issues with bombing the crap out of Gaza, right, and all the moral issues to do with the whole conflict. Just from the point of view of Hamas versus Israel are going to win that one. It's how they win. It's a question, and whether that brings in other players. But as far as the US supporting either of those sides, supporting Ukraine or supporting Israel, Ukraine needs more support than Israel. And it is, I think, will have more ramifications globally than the Israel situation. The difference is that you will have more Israeli, or you'll have more Jewish influence within US politics, as in they're largely overrepresentative compared to the general population of the US in terms of Jewish politicians. So that might skew focus on Israel as opposed to Ukraine. But other than that, Ukraine really should get the priority, is my opinion. Take it for what it is, which is correct. Kiev Independent says Defense Ministry is due to allocate $4.8 billion for shells and missiles in 2024. This is the big priority for Ukraine itself in terms of manufacturing and procurement. For obvious reasons, they use up a shed load, and artillery is still the god of war. Yes, drones are playing a massively important part, but one of the reasons they were less successful territorially in the counteroffensive period was because they didn't have enough artillery ammunition. They did use it quite freely in places, but essentially you are bound by the amount of artillery you had. And I said that at the beginning of the counteroffensive. They will go on. They will culminate at the point where it's not about running out of equipment in terms of tanks. They haven't even used their Abrams tanks yet. And we'll come on to talk about that next. But the counteroffensive push can last only as long as material or ammunition, and it was ammunition that was always going to go first. In terms of the Abrams, Ukraine still has not used Abrams and is unlikely to do so before spring. In other words, this is according to Business Insider, in other words, there's not going to be a counteroffensive before then. They're not going to use these defensively. So it's going to be waiting for the next counteroffensive, where I think things will be in a lot better place for Ukraine. Just going forward, like, I'm not all that down on account of the fact that Ukraine didn't make the ground that they would like to have made in the counteroffensive, because they've succeeded in all these other metrics like I talked about this morning. It's about, okay, so going forward, what position are you going to be in? Now, if the allied nations are intent on giving air defenses, and that's really good, I think, for the use of F-16s, which will come into play at the end of next spring. You're thinking, right, you'll have F-16s and whatever weaponry they will have on board. You will have a bunch of Abrams. And I was thinking, yes, I was having a chat, not last night, actually, the night of my boys' rugby training, so talking to the dads about, of course, they want to hear my opinions on this, but talking about how many tanks the US has. I know I've spoken to you about this a lot, but just when you've got, like, I don't know, 6,000 bits of kit, the US could easily, and I know, many Americans be like, oh, why do you always pick on it? I'm not picking on you. You can do the most good here. They could slip. I'll just slip you 100 tanks. They could slip Ukraine 100 tanks without even talking about that, right? Without announcing that to the world. So, no one's going to go like, oh, that's escalator. It's just like, oh, you've got another 100 Abrams. But when it comes to the next spring, the end of spring, moving on to summer, and you're thinking, okay, Ukraine, be in a position to do a really good counteroffensive. They'll have F-16s, perhaps even Gripens. And then you've got, suddenly like 100, 150 Abrams tanks. And keep on with the IFVs from various countries, including the US. And you could see a position where they really are prepared to do a counteroffensive. This last counteroffensive that took place, Ukraine were waiting, and they delayed it. And Zelensky literally said, we are still waiting for kit to come. So they didn't attack in the spring when they ideally wanted to, because they just didn't have the kit. But if they can properly get the kit for next time, then they'll be in such a good position, because also the Russian equipment will have been thoroughly degraded from just months and months and months of looking at the figures that we're looking at every day at the moment. When they lost 100 pieces of kit yesterday. That is just significant. Right. Finland wants a higher 2024 budget in order to boost Ukraine aid capacity. So the big worry, like, I'm being very positive there, but the big worry is politics. The Western politics and nations that are moving in a certain direction that doesn't favour Ukraine. And that could be the US as well. We don't know what's going to happen there. But those nations that are right next to these hot points, i.e. right next to Ukraine, your Baltics, your Nordic states, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, they seem still firmly behind Ukraine. That assistance is unwavering because they have their own existential future connected to the outcome of the war. So Finland wants a higher budget, and the Finnish government has submitted a proposal for changes in the 2024 budget, including a higher spending limit for Ukraine aid, the country's finance ministry said. And that's given that they've got this right-wing coalition in. It's not that the right wing isn't for Ukraine. I have plenty of viewers out there who are right-wing and are pro-Ukraine. What I worry about are the particular populist parties that we know, and this is what I've just written an article on, we know Russia has influence through their hybrid warfare and their information warfare. So we know certain ones, so like the Finns party is one of the populist parties in Finland that is going to be pro-Ukraine. So there are elements in all of these countries pro-Russia, that have Russian influence. But it's not always the case. I mean, you look at Italy, you look at the last government in Poland. But it's not unanimously the case. So it's really good that such a government, a coalition of parties that includes a rather pro-Russian party, is still doing stuff like this. So now on to Petro Poroshenko's foundation. Who is he? Well, actually, he's a previous, he's been Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's the 5th president from 2014 to 19. So he was the last president of Ukraine, and he has transferred an aid package, as he's done a number of times, of aid to the Ukrainian armed forces, including 5 Tatra trucks. These are the Czech trucks that can actually have big munitions like self-propelled guns and all sorts of stuff on top. But 5 basic Tatra trucks, the 8x8 trucks. 8 DAF trucks, 2 Ford and 8x6 hook lift trucks, 7 mobile workshops and 7 workshop trailers, 164 DJI Mavic 3 Pros, those are drones, 558 truck tires. Really good stuff from them. That's just a private entity doing that. Excellent. Right, a commander of one of the most experienced strike drone companies in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian army, has said that one FPV drone crew uses up equipment worth $10,000 per working day. This is the demand for drones that kind of both sides will have. But I talk about how it's not going to be uniform across the front line. There'll be certain areas where Russia will have more drones than the Ukrainians, but I think the Ukrainians will, in general, have more drone capacity than the Russians because of the amount of money that's been raised and things like Army of Drones and United 24, etc., etc. But that won't be uniform. But it also shows. It also, this indicates that they need all those drones, because they use, like, one good drone crew uses $10,000 worth of drones per day. They don't last forever, or they are one-way drones. But either they being, kamikaze drones, they'll go, fly, blow up, you need another one. Go, fly, blow up. Or they are spotting or dropping IDs, but then I forget what the percentage chance of those not coming back are, but they will only last a few missions before you need to replace those. So, talking about drones, this is Russia. So this is Dmitry Medvedev visiting the Center for Unmanned Aircraft Systems in Moscow's Rudnevo Industrial Park and holding a meeting on increasing drone production. Again, they are wanting this too. So here he is. And as you can see, these are helicopter drones. Interesting. These are not drones that we've seen before. I bet there's going to be all sorts of people looking at every bit of equipment in this factory and saying, is that a Western piece of equipment? Should that be being used? Is there any kind of sanctioning we can do for parts? So on and so forth. Anyway, this is a worry if they are able to up the production of drones. It's this arms race that's taking place, not in terms of capability, really. I mean, that is a thing, but once it's used by one side, the other side will get hold of it and be able to replicate it. It's about capacity. And here's a video of a Russian remote drone, unmanned ground vehicle, a DIY drone. So it's just been made and is being tested. And we see a number of these. More Russian DIY UGVs. A logistics platform was spotted somewhere in the Donetsk region by Russia Luna Mill blogger, and that was last November. So this is this November, and we've got another UGV being tested. So the Russians are, getting their own kit together. As we've seen the Ukrainians use UGVs, the Russians are not far behind, or indeed are pound for pound matching them. Right, this annoys me. So this is the Desert Cross 1003 kind of light all-terrain vehicle that the Chinese have provided to the tune of sort of 1,500 plus. I think there's a batch of 1,500, maybe a batch of 800 or something. So a couple of thousand of these. And I guess they're allowed to do that because it's not a military vehicle or military piece of equipment. It was like, well, I don't know. You see them on the front line; they look pretty military to me, and especially when they're starting to whack guns on top of them, that is a worry. Anyway, Russians have begun to install turrets on the Desert Cross, which have been provided by China. Okay, moving on to geopolitical stuff. Now, we will start with Ukraine being forced to risk talks. A Baltic diplomat has said. So this is a warning from the Lithuanian Foreign Minister, Landsbergis. This is in Bloomberg. I'll just quote from this. Kiev's lack of missile systems and ammunition, as well as the months-long decision-making process in the European Union, risk putting Ukraine in a position in which it has no option but to sue for peace, he said. Quote, this wouldn't be Ukraine's choice, Landsbergis said in a TV interview with the public broadcaster LRT. The Ukraine that we know and the Ukraine that will be helping as long as we breathe would never choose to negotiate with terrorists, but the reality may simply be just that. Once broad support for Ukraine is showing signs of cracking as Kiev's counteroffensive has ground to a stalemate and the war approaches its third year. The US administration's commitments for weapons deliveries has been cast into doubt by Republican resistance, as the EU's ambition to send 1 million artillery shells by March is likely to fail. Quote, it looks comical when we see North Korea is helping Russia more than the European Union is for Ukraine, Landsbergis said, referring to deliveries from Pyongyang in recent weeks. Yes, true. Although in defense of the EU, like Pyongyang they've got millions of rounds just sitting there doing nothing. So it's relatively easy for them to go, okay, we'll give you 1 million rounds if you help us send a satellite up into space. Yeah, awesome. Russia would be like, yeah, happy days, we'll do that. Where saying to the EU, we want 1 million rounds, like, yeah, we don't have 1 million rounds and we can't buy them. Like, they need to be somewhere, so we need to build them. Okay, let's ramp up production. So they are trying to do that. So I don't know that it's comical. It's just the reality of the situation when you've been living in the shadow of a peace dividend. Well, it's not the shadow. When you've been living in the light of a peace dividend for the last however long, then you don't have the production capacity and capabilities. So that needs to be built, and that is taking place. It's just, unfortunately, takes much longer than we would like. India has refused. This is, I think, significant. And it shows a ramping up of sanctions and a ramping up of closing loopholes and putting pressure on places like India. India has refused to accept a sanctioned tanker carrying Russian oil. Over the past month, says Anton Gerashchenko, the US imposed sanctions against 5 tankers that violated the price ceiling of $60 per barrel for Russian oil. After that, the ship stopped delivering oil to consumers, according to Bloomberg. That's huge. 4 of the tankers under sanctions are connected to Sovcomflot. Another one belongs to a Turkish company. The NS Century tanker has been regularly carrying oil to India in recent months, but after sanctions were imposed against it a week ago, went adrift off the southern coast of Sri Lanka. India's Directorate General of Shipping said it was awaiting instructions from the government on whether the ship would be allowed to offload the oil it had. India has recently limited its oil purchases from Russia, with the latter's share falling in October to its lowest in 9 months. Reuters calculations show India's total imports rose by 8.4% to 40.7 million barrels from September, but at the expense of OPEC countries whose share rose from 50% to 54%. The share of Russia, from which India bought 1.56 million barrels, 1.2% more than in September, fell from 35% to 33%. So they're importing more. They're predominantly getting that from OPEC countries, and actually the share from Russia fell 35 to 33%. That's or it's not the share actually. That's the real terms fall, which is, I think, important, because if you're going to import more, you can have a reduced share from Russia, but still increased Russian exports or imports in real terms. So if you follow me, so you're playing around with numbers here. So it's important the real term imports from Russia go down. The discount of Russian oil against world prices has narrowed in recent months, making it less attractive. However, US imposed sanctions against tankers, traders told Reuters, have led to increased discounts again. The first time since mid-July, the Urals grade fell below $60 a barrel when shipped from the Baltic ports of Primorsk and Ust-Luga. Three major Greek shipping companies, Minerva Marine, Thena Maris, and TMS Tankers, have also stopped transporting Russian crude in recent weeks, four industry sources told Reuters and showed ship data. This is massive, right? Greece particularly is a bit of a problem in that it facilitates Russian crude oil exports, as well as I'm sure LNG and whatnot. So that there are these shippers starting to change their behavior, I think is really significant. So let's look at this. This is another bit of shipping news. Let's look behind the UK vessel SH Express IMO 908-5443 carrying stolen Ukrainian grail, currently docked in Tripoli. So what is this? A UK-owned ship facilitates first known international export of from Russian-occupied Mariupol. Reluctance of governments to target Russian grain trade with sanctions has allowed grain plundering operations to grow. SH Express is now berthed in Tripoli. So, oh dear, this is a British ship. Let's have a look at this. This looks like a problem. Actually, it's a little bit more complex than that. The vessel is owned by British company SHD Marine Shipping Company Limited. The beneficial owner, though, is a Russian national, Mohammed El-Sheikh DIB. However, the company is dormant. The registered address is a front for a large Russian money laundering scheme uncovered in 2014. By the Organised Crime and Corruption Network. Anyway, the vessel is managed by Romarine Europe Limited out of Greece. Romarine Europe is part of Romarine Group, which states it has offices in Romania, Beirut, Greece, and Turkey. Romarine seem less keen to advertise the fact that they are based out of Tartus in Syria. Chief Financial Officer Afif Daya is based there, and as is crewing manager Diala Duna. Tartus is a main Russian naval base and center for the transportation of stolen Ukrainian grain. Interestingly, their operations manager George Druby has close links to Palau Ship Register, International Shipping Bureau, and GMCG, all of which have previously been closely linked to the dark fleet activity. Strange that. In other words, what might seem like a UK-owned ship is not, and it's actually linked all the way back to basically Russian shipping concerns operating out of Syria, where a lot of the stolen grain ends up going. So yeah, this is dark fleet that needs to, we need to get a handle on this dark fleet and stop it from operating. Okay, Russia's again to stick on the same kind of subject. Russia's grand Ukrainian grain theft is a premeditated war crime, according to a legal report. Now, I had a live chat with Exit, who I don't know, was someone that tweeted any of this stuff. No, go and check out that live stream. It was really interesting. We talked a lot about shipping. We talked a lot about grain and agriculture. And she was saying, I'm not too sure that this was a premeditated war crime. And I generally agree with that, because this whole thing seemed like a war, but it seems like a war now. But at the beginning, it was a special military operation. And I think they weren't planning on it being anything more than a swapping the government over a 2-week period. And when it didn't turn into that, then they had to change into this war. And I think a kind of premeditated starving Holodomor style of the Ukrainians is not, I think, consonant with that knowledge or with those claims. I think it's not likely to be a premeditated starve the Ukrainians, but just like we're going to up our grain export capabilities by buying these grain storage units and etc., because we're going to be in charge of Ukraine and we're going to be using that grain for our own good. It's not like we are trying to starve the Ukrainians, we are just going to need a lot more of their grain. So it can be linked. It might have been a collateral bit of collateral damage to doing that. The fact that Ukrainians might not get that food so much, but I don't agree so much with this. Anyway, the new report asks whether Russia specifically stockpiled cargo ships ahead of time in anticipation of seizing and reselling valuable harvests that now fund its invading army. So it's not that that's not true. I think that was going to happen, but I don't know that it can be seen as a premeditated war crime. Past the fact the whole war's a war crime, really. Like, their idea was that Ukraine would be a vassal state, be part of the Russian Federation, really, and so therefore they're just going to use all that grain themselves. Anyway, the European Commission has approved advance payments to Hungary of around 900 million euros as part of its still frozen share of recovery funds. The EU is trying to overcome Budapest's veto on aid to Ukraine. So Hungary's being really difficult, as I keep reporting. And the only thing that the EU really have over them is funding. So you're due a whole bunch of funding from the EU. You're not going to get that because you're being a bunch of numbnuts. Stop being numbnuts and we'll give you this money. And hopefully something's coming back the other way. If they do release this funding, that Hungary will toe the party line more. Right, Turkey informed NATO that ratification of Sweden's membership bid will be completed in November. Sources familiar with the matter told Reuters last week they delayed a vote on Sweden's NATO membership bid in order to hold further talks on the subject. I hope this doesn't go on too long. I hope this does get ratified in November. Really important. We've got 1 week left of November. Note to self, do more Christmas shopping. Yeah. Come on, Turkey, you can do it. Washington Post reports that Russian and Chinese companies are discussing possible underwater Crimean tunnel, a possible tunnel project. Russian and Chinese state-connected business executives have reportedly begun discussing the possibility of constructing an underwater tunnel across the Crimean Strait amidst fears that Ukrainian forces will continue striking the Kerch Bridge. The Washington Post reported today, citing unnamed sources from Ukraine's intelligence services. It wouldn't surprise me, but the only thing is that that's a real long-term project that you would need a lot of stability in order to build that, and I don't think you can do that in the middle of a war zone effectively. But from a kind of just an ideas point of view, that would be more protected, obviously, because it's got a whole load of sea in a way. You would think than a bridge. You would wonder whether Ukraine would then start getting together like explosive submarine drones and then going and blowing up near there and causing all sorts of trouble. So could just be an ideas thing at the moment rather than anything with a tangible outcome. Right. Direct losses of the Ukrainian economy from blocking the Ukrainian-Polish border have already amounted to more than 400 million euros, the Federation of Employers. This really pisses me off. All the money that allies are getting to Ukraine to help them, and it's being screwed over by these Polish truck drivers who themselves are arguably, as I reported yesterday, being supported or being motivated by Russian influence and money. Annoys me a lot. Anyway, that's the end of the military aid and geopolitical video. I hope that was of use to you, of interest even. Please like, subscribe and share. I really appreciate all of your support. Thank you for those who support on Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal. Really do appreciate that. There's also, just to let you know, that at the bottom of my, the bottom of my video is a description. And towards the top of the description, there's some merchandise you can get through Reporting from Ukraine. I'm kind of collaborate with them. So if they've got a Black Friday deal that's going for another day tops, where you get like 20-30% off. If you buy any merchandise through there, then you can get it a bit cheaper at the moment. So click on the link below, and then my channel gets a little bit of commission. Or don't, do whatever you like. It's a free world. Luckily for you guys, not for Ukrainians. Take care, guys. Speak soon.